Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Glidden, and I'm going to welcome you to our Intergovernmental Relations Committee, our regularly scheduled meeting. I'm the chair of this committee, and I'm joined today by council members Warsame, Fry, and Andrew Johnson, and we are a quorum of the committee. We have two discussion items on our agenda for today, and I think I'm just going to flip those items because we have with us today our congressman for the 5th District, Keith Ellison, is here. We're so pleased to see you, and we're excited to hear what you have to share. So welcome, Representative Ellison.
Well, Madam Chair, thank you, and thank you to all the members for being here. Certainly appreciate the tremendous work of the Minneapolis City Council. And I just like to always note that local government is the closest unit of government to the people. And so we're grateful to you for the work that you do. And I want to say a special thanks to everyone here on the committee. Actually, Councilmember Warsame and I did a panel just the other day together. Mm-hmm. We were right there in the community center at Brian Coyle. And we had a community where we've been doing these Civics 101 forums. And we want to work with all of our council members to do them. But this one, we had a city council, the county official, we had Peter McLaughlin, then we had Representative Ilhan Omar, and then myself. So we had state, city, federal, county, and we just talked to the folks about what we all do and how we do it together. And just want to thank you personally, council member, for being there, for your excellent comments. And I want to invite all of the members assembled to join with us in doing this because, as you know, we all do everything. We just work on different parts of it. So mm-hmm. I work on immigration. Well, you work on immigration. You certainly work with immigrants. We work on war and peace, but you work with veterans every day. We all work together to serve the constituent. So this is what the Civics 101 is doing. And perhaps President Johnson, we can do one, or the other council member Johnson, we can do one together. You all gave me a list of items that you thought we should address. So we did some preparation to talk on these issues. So I'll just go through a presentation quickly, and then we can have some dialogue.
Thank you.
First, on the issue of immigration. Let me share with you that of all the constituent issues that come before my office, housing, immigration, Social Security, VA benefits, the whole range. We get a lot of them. You get a lot of them. Immigration is the number one issue, and if we cut that number in half, it would still be the biggest. Immigration is the broken part of the system that generates the most constituent questions. So, the Department of Homeland Security removed much of the discretion of how the Immigration and Custom Enforcement (ICE) deports people. We have heard many sad stories from people who own businesses and are even married to U.S. citizens about being deported. In the past, it was people who were facing some sort of a criminal justice issue that could end up having them deported. Nowadays, we've even seen people who have actually called the police for service and ended up getting put into the criminal justice system. And of course, the one story that hit the news was somebody who was on our metro system got asked about their status, and that person ended up getting into the system. So things have changed. In the first few months of 2016, we have seen a 150% increase in arrests for those who have not committed a crime for ICE-related matter. On the issue of sanctuary city separation ordinances, however you phrase it, I'm alarmed by the efforts of the Trump administration to condition funding on facilitating ICE enforcement. I have signed a letter and will be, and I'm vigorously opposing any conditionality of burn jag money on cooperation with ICE. I think that ICE has its work to do, the city has its work to do, the county has its work to do, and each should be allowed to do it without interference from the federal government. I also have written a letter to Hennepin County Sheriff Stanek to ask for clarification on his policy when he contacts ICE for individuals in detention, and can expect to be following up on that. On the issue of healthcare, everyone knows now that there were a number of big moves to try to repeal the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. Ultimately, the effort did not succeed, as you know. The Senate bill was called the Better Care Reconciliation Act, and it did not receive the votes to move forward. But it could return. So we're staying vigilant on that. According to the Congressional Budget Office, which is a nonpartisan budget office that does analysis, 22 million Americans would lose coverage by 2026, and 15 million in 2018 alone would have lost coverage. And we've done a lot of work in Minnesota to get our rate of uncovered very low. Actually, we're a national leader, but part of it is because of the Affordable Care Act, and so it would not benefit us. According to the Urban Institute, 417,000 Minnesotans would lose coverage, increasing the uninsured rate by 106%. Medicaid cuts would total in the range of $772 billion. And as I'd like to just point out to you, I'm sure you're aware, Medicaid is the largest funding source for nursing homes, long-term care. So a lot of our seniors will be very negatively impacted. Earlier today, I was at Clear Housing, housing for people who are battling HIV, and they depended quite heavily on that. So this is something. This is like an existential threat to our healthcare delivery system, and we're treating it as such. Now, on the issue of housing, I'll tell you this: housing is probably my top priority issue. But let me share with you this. President Trump offered a budget already this year. In his budget proposal, which is not law, but it proposes to eliminate the Community Development Block Grant, a program which you all use quite extensively in the city. Low-income home energy assistance program, LIHEAP, which is very important for seniors. Without LIHEAP, it's a choice between food and heat. And this is something that no one should have to make that decision about. Section 4, community development and affordable housing, and community development financial institution. CDFIs are financial institutions. Most of the financial institutions that do lend in some of our most heavily impacted communities are CDFIs. And so these organizations that really lend where others won't would be greatly negatively impacted. The good news is that even among Republicans, this budget is encountering a lot of resistance. I talked to people from Southern Ohio and Kentucky, and one of the things that the budget zeroes out is the Appalachia Regional Council, and they are facing all kinds of problems in that part of the country, and they voted for the president, so they were quite surprised to see themselves zeroed out, and yet they were. And so we're working to build a coalition to stop that. Now, on the issue of housing, I want to commend the city of Minneapolis. Thank you all for the great research you did through the innovation team, which did a report, Evictions in Minneapolis. While the news is sobering, at least we know. At least we have the numbers. This is critically important. And I think that you cannot fix a problem until you face that problem. And so to know how extensive the eviction situation is the first step to trying to fix it. And let me tell you, Minneapolis is by no means alone. There was a book written called Evicted by Matthew Desmond, who will be here on October 22nd, which it delves into this issue in Milwaukee. And so I just mentioned that we're not by ourselves. We're certainly not the only ones who have this problem, but we do have it. And so it's an issue that I'm quite concerned about. I did a community forum on evictions. I've convened some community meetings on evictions, one yesterday, and I want to thank representatives from the city for being present. The idea is not to try to blame the landlords, but to try to get everybody around the table to figure out how we reduce evictions. You reduce evictions, you're going to have more school stability, you're going to improve your health outcomes, and the evictions actually cost quite a bit of money. And so we're looking at ideas on how we might go forward, and I certainly will share them with you when I tabulate the list. But as you know, the report found a disproportionate impact in low-income and minority neighborhoods. About 25% of all the evictions were in 55411, 55412, and yet they were found all over the city. As you know, if somebody gets an unlawful detainer on their record, it makes it that much harder for them to get a place to stay. And when they do get one, it's usually higher cost, lower quality. And yet, in our conversations with landlords, are like, look, we have a right to rent. We don't necessarily want to evict people, but what are the alternatives? So I think it's better to get into a constructive conversation, and we believe that that is the right direction. I'll say one of the stats that we found in this study was over the last 3 years, nearly half of the renter households in North Minneapolis experienced an eviction filing. That's a lot. So we had an evictions forum recently, and we began an evictions working group, and the city has very generously participated, offering ideas on what we could do. Again, there is an adversarial system that goes on in housing court. We don't need to replicate it. We're looking for answers for tenants and for landlords and for everybody. On the issue of transit, this again is another high priority for me personally. Housing and transit are kind of like go together. I'm very happy that both the Southwest Light Rail Transit and Botno are making progress. The Trump budget would cut New Start's transit funding by 43%, which would be devastating. But as is true for other parts of the budget, there's a bipartisan pushback on these kind of cuts. The Trump budget would also propose to stop any funding of projects without existing full funding grant agreements. But so far, Congress has not agreed, and I actually anticipate we will not agree. It's just too much pain on both sides of the aisle for us to agree to that. Now, on the issue of Southwest Light Rail, $10 million was allocated in this year's federal budget. That's kind of a placeholder. The federal government is obligated to fund half that project. I'm pleased the project is now ready to submit a federal funding agreement, and I could tell you that I have directed my staff to throw everything we have into making sure this project works. And I want to, as you probably are well aware, but I'll just note for now, negotiations with the railroads, including BNSF. I understand that they've made good progress, and people are hopeful that we will have these agreements straightened out. I'm knocking on wood right here. Also, Botno engineering is on track, and I'm pushing to have it included in next year's budget. Botno is a top priority. I want everyone who lives in the northwest corridor of the city to know that we're going to be fighting for Botno. As you know, the 5th District extends into Brooklyn Center as well, so we represent them. And we are absolutely dedicated to Botno, and I've been working closely with Commissioner Opad on this issue, and we're fully committed. I will say this. If there was a setback with regard to Southwest, I don't think that would improve our chances in Botno. We need to have both. They're counting cumulative as opposed to separate and independent. And so we win on one, we win on both. We lose on one, we might lose on both. Last night I held a forum to highlight the rise of voter suppression efforts across the country. I had 150 people there. Minnesotans are very concerned about the right to vote. Minneapolis is a true leader on elections. Thank you all for setting up places where people can vote all around this city. This is tremendous. I hope you're very proud of it. And there's a reason why Minnesota has the highest voter turnout in America. Part of it is that our lead city takes voting and access very seriously. So thank you for that. Tax reform. When we get back in September, I think one of the top issues is going to be corporate tax reform. Congress and the Trump administration have said that they want to do it this year. We'll see. They're considering reducing individual deductions as well as a corporate tax rate. We have to stay in touch on this issue. We will. My office wants to engage with the city to talk about how corporate tax reform may impact the city of Minneapolis. Certainly want to be in that conversation. I can assure you of this. I do not consider taxes to be some sort of a bad thing. I think they are the price we pay for living in a civilized society. And I don't want to tax anybody any more than is necessary, but I definitely believe we need to fund the government. And some people say smaller government, lower taxes. I say, no, that just really means starve government and cut services. And what I'm hearing from the citizens is that clean water, clean air, research and basic medical research, all these, the investments in arts and education are important, and we're going to continue to defend them. Let me also mention the Environmental Protection Agency. The Trump administration's budget proposal would cut it by 31%. We had a remarkably well-attended community meeting last week on this issue in North Minneapolis. It was standing room only. Scott Pruitt, who is the EPA administrator, is actively trying to undermine the agency, which could harm state and local partners that rely on EPA funding, including the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. Again, our forum was packed and people are quite concerned. Moving on to to wrap up, the opioid crisis is no doubt a tremendous scourge affecting the whole country. While Minnesota, we do need more funding for Narcan, and we need to protect and expand Medicaid, and we need to make certain private insurers also cover mental health and treatment services. It is important to understand that while this opioid addiction problem is facing everyone, people of all backgrounds, it is hurting rural communities very acutely, and Native American communities die of opioid overdoses at a rate 5 times higher than white Minnesotans. So this is something that we all have to take very, very seriously. The census. We have to start our conversation about how we're going to collaborate on getting everyone counted right away. This is essential. My office will be fully dedicated to making sure everybody is engaged in the count. The 2020 census is under attack. They're trying to cut census funding, and I recently joined with other members of Congress, including Carol Maloney and others, urging the Department of Commerce, which oversees the census, to find a new head of the census and demand that the Congress fully fund the 2020 census. The census is how we ensure democracy is fully representative. It also informs research, public health emergency planning, and funding formulas. Now, also, I want to make note that I am thrilled about how the city's zero waste efforts are going. I want to commend you on that. I actually have a piece of federal legislation entitled the Zero Waste Development and Expansion Act in Congress. Next week, I'm speaking to the National Recycling Conference when they come to Minneapolis about this piece of legislation. Minneapolis is a leader in the area of zero waste. And it's just important to mention we burn a lot of valuable stuff in the HERC. Much of that waste could be diverted and put back into productive use, and much of the ash has to go into a landfill anyway. So it's not the choice isn't burn it or landfill it. It's got to be landfilled in any case, in a more concentrated toxic form, I might add. If we divert the paper, the plastic, the glass, and all that stuff, we can actually put more people to work and preserve our world. And let me just, my final point is that in 2016, Minnesota was hit with an all-time low for teen pregnancy, dropping by 69% since 1980. This is something to be proud of. I know you specialize in solving people's problems, but this is something that we should lift up and celebrate. It's an incredible achievement. And yet at the same time, going back to the Trump budget, congressional Republicans are threatening to defund teen pregnancy prevention programs in favor of abstinence-only education. We need your stories. We need your methodology. We need to tell why the Minneapolis method works so that other people can benefit from it. And so that's my report for you today. I'll also mention one other proposal that I would like you to be very on the alert about, and that is a piece of legislation that would is entitled the Concealed Carry Reciprocity Act. Now you might say, well, what is that? Well, what it says is that if you are from a state that allows you to carry loaded firearms, then other states have to recognize and give full faith and credit to that other state's state law. If this law passes, safe cities like Minneapolis, well, relatively, we all know the dangers are there, no doubt. I don't want to minimize, but we all know that relatively safer places will face new dangers because people from relatively more dangerous places where there's more gun availability will be able to just carry them straight across state lines. So this is something I'm quite concerned about, something I want to alert you to. And you may ask, well, what's the chances that's going to pass? I'd say 40-60. So definitely worth being concerned about. So that's my presentation, and I'm prepared to take notes based on your questions and concerns. And again, just want to say thank you for the tremendous work that you do every day for our citizens, and want to collaborate with you in the future on all the projects. As I said before, we all work on everything. We just got our roles to play as we do the best we can for our citizens. So if there's any questions, I'll be happy to field them. Otherwise,
All right. I know that we do have some questions, and thank you so much. Councilmember Andrew Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Congressman Ellison, for the updates. I had a question specifically about this concept of restore the gorge and lock and dam number 1 being potentially removed. We had community conversations on this with a whole variety of partners, and there was an absolutely huge turnout of community members interested in this idea. I know it would be a cross-jurisdiction issue, and that there's a lot of interest in St. Paul, and that it has a lot of environmental benefits, recreational and economic benefits as well. It's not without its challenges, certainly. I think the rowers are interested in a seat at the table, and we also have to look at that hydroelectric plant by the Ford site, and if there's some way to offset that amount of electricity being generated, which we're certainly glad is sustainable. But I'm curious, from your standpoint, if you expect that the Army Corps of Engineers will be moving forward with the disposition study, if you have any other thoughts or comments on some of those challenges.
thank you, Councilmember. I think at this point, this is at a discussion stage, and you're right. People are talking about it quite a bit. I want to get more community input and really get to the point where we can get a groundswell. But I think it's an issue worth studying. There are pluses and minuses to it. How will it affect the paddlers that are out there now? And this part of the Minneapolis part of the Mississippi River is going through a new life. I mean, people are doing the paddle share program. They're getting out on that river, and this is great. Will a program that restores the gorge negatively impact that? Some people think so. But I guess what I'll say is we're in the study phase, and I'm not prepared to offer definitive, but I can tell you this, that if we come to a consensus that this is the right thing to do, I'll step up and take care of the federal parts of this issue. Let me add this too. I still remain hopeful and optimistic about building a cap over 94 so that people in North Minneapolis can more easily and readily access the Mississippi River. I know that myself and President Johnson have talked about this in the past, and as we're talking about the river, let's talk about access for everybody to the river.
Certainly. Well, I appreciate the update on that, and just wanted to relay as well that there's definitely a growing interest among community members and a lot of engagement on this issue for it being so early on and so initial in the conversation. And again, we recognize there's a lot of challenges too, with all of the potential benefits, but just wanted to relay that on that the conversation continues to build steam and progress.
Thanks. Let's stay in touch on it.
Council President Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Congressman, I'm really grateful that you mentioned the statistics about teen pregnancy, and you mentioned Commissioner Opad, and he commissioned work through the county probably 10 years ago
Yeah.
on this very issue, and the outstanding results that we've seen from the work that's been done on that. It is probably the most sensible dollars that we spend. And it is about access through easily obtained medical services for
Mhm.
young people that make the absolute difference. So I think to me that is just vital, and it's vital for it affects so many other systems then too. And so anyway, I wanted to say thank you for saying that, because I just think we, you know, it would be it's a difficult thing to measure, but when you look at, what's the cost of keeping a child in newborn intensive care for a day, versus providing some contraceptives is just, it's insane if we don't, keep going down that road. It would be a tragedy to go back the other way.
Well, given your background in the healthcare field, I
Yeah.
mean, you know this stuff as well as anyone. And look, we're going to spend it on the front end or on the back end. I think it makes sense that, but we've got to lift up this story. This is a good news story.
Absolutely.
And we talk about the bad things, but we don't talk about things that are really working nearly enough.
Yeah,
Thank
you
you.
are so correct.
Mhm.
I had a question, and maybe there's no answer other than just kind of reading what's in the news about your understanding of the process that's being utilized for appointing the U.S. attorney.
Right.
And also, of course, I've been kind of following the process on appointing federal judges, and I didn't know if you had any thoughts you wanted to share on what's happening around both of those important processes.
Yeah. Well, I've been reading in the paper as you have, and we've been in touch with senators' offices. And quite honestly, we're hopeful and optimistic, but there's the Trump administration is well known for being very slow to make the appointments, and consultation has not been very good. I did hear that the U.S. attorney issue was going to be resolved in the near term, but I didn't get a lot of details on it. And I'll make sure that I share information with you. As you know, that's more of a Senate prerogative than a House one. And so we'll stay in touch with you on it. But there are any number of appointments that are still left unfilled.
Okay. Another piece I wanted to ask you about, I know you talked about the housing, and maybe you said this and I just missed it, but what's your understanding of how the federal budget proposal might affect public housing? So already we're sort of in this, just a huge deficit with maintaining existing assets, and a lot of concerns about how to do that, in proposals for, how do we do the best with what we have, or, of course, concerning to the public too. So I was just wondering if you had any thoughts to share on that.
Not good news.
Mhm.
The HUD budget proposal is cut 14%. I doubt we'll be there, but the fact is that's the Trump proposal at this point. I think even the House Republicans have done better than that in their proposal. But as you know, during the Obama administration, HUD did a study on all the public housing in the United States and came up with a $28 billion price tag
Mhm.
to bring everything up to maintenance. And even during the big push that we did early in the Obama administration, the stimulus bill, we did $4 billion. That's what we did at our high water mark. So that's when proposals came up that I never thought were great proposals, but you got to make do, to allow public housing authorities to give a mortgage and assign rents to a renter to then use the money to do repairs if they could pledge the rents. And this went through various names. Rental assistance project. There's various names. People got concerned because it's like, well, wait a minute. If you default, then are we going to lose a public asset? It's a legitimate concern. We put things in there. We did do a pilot, and the pilot was well oversubscribed. We had more people, more housing authorities applying than we were able to manage. There has not been any default so far, and a number of housing authorities report good outcomes. Minneapolis and St. Paul are regarded as some of the best housing authorities in the country when it comes to public housing. Now I know, a prophet is honored everywhere but in their own home, right? So I'm not saying that there aren't plenty of legitimate issues that could be raised, but I'm saying comparing nationally, we have an excellent system. But what I'll say is that at this point, the Trump administration, under the leadership of Dr. Carson, has proposed greater cuts. And in fact, I've invited Secretary Carson to Minneapolis, and we haven't heard anything back yet. In fact, I've issued another letter of inquiry because we just want to talk directly to the Secretary about housing. And if we can get some commitment to come here, we'll make sure that he comes to an accessible part of the city to make sure that citizens can hear his words and ask him some questions.
Okay. Thank you. Councilmember Warsame.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I think you asked the question that I wanted to ask about public housing, but I'd like to thank Congressman Keith Ellison for his support and his work, and the fact we did have an informative evening in Bryan Coyle. And
That's right.
a lot of the community members really appreciated it, so thank you for that. But my question is just to ask about the budget, and how likely is it that this budget is going to pass, and what do you see going forward? Yeah.
I would say it's unlikely to pass in its current format. But council member, you've been in bargaining situations when somebody quotes a ridiculous price that they know you're not going to pay. But then if you can get them to come down from that, even if you're paying more than you think you should pay, you feel like you've gotten somewhere because they came down. So are we really going to see a 14% cut to HUD and a 31% cut to EPA? Probably not. Are we really going to see the Appalachia Regional Council zeroed out? Probably not. Probably not going to see the Community Development Block Grant zeroed out, but you will see cuts. And when we see those cuts, I hope that we don't think that, oh, look, it could have been worse. Because the truth is, I remember somebody saying to me early in my political career, if you won't take it one loaf at a time, they'll feed it to you one slice at a time. You look up a year later and you ate half a loaf and another loaf is coming, but it's all in slices. So it's important to push back on this. And it's important for leaders such as us to really kind of lift the sights of people and say, look, the government does have a responsibility to make sure that certain needs of American people are met. Housing, healthcare, good transportation, medical research, these things are critical and they are worthy of our tax expenditure. And so we've got to trumpet it, and because the fight is on.
Follow up with that. How likely is it that we're going to have a shutdown?
I don't think we're going to have a shutdown. Paul Ryan is saying he doesn't want to do a shutdown. Related to the shutdown is the debt ceiling. And Treasury Secretary Mnuchin is saying we're not going to crack the debt ceiling. Although I tell you this, council member, we've already passed the threshold where we should have increased the debt ceiling. Now the Secretary of Treasury is engaging what they call extraordinary measures. What that means is just like any household might wait paying the light bill in order to pay another bill and kind of just managing the bills as you don't have enough money for all of them at the same time. That is literally what the federal government is doing right now. But what I would say is that it's not that we don't have enough money in America to meet our expenses. It's just that we're in this big battle about what I think is diminution of government. And as you know, if we don't fund our parks, then one of the next things that people propose is that we sell them off. And of course, some people are happy about that because they love to privatize, public assets. So this is a concern. But I think we're probably going to avoid the big crisis. But we need to stay in touch because I doubt it's going to happen, but I can't promise you that it won't. Yeah.
So Congressman Ellison, I don't see other questions, so that's actually maybe a good just question to end on for you from the perspective of the city of Minneapolis. We, like many other cities our size, and we contract with folks to help us lobby our interests at the federal level. We've participated in the National League of Cities, which I think, just being on their email list, they are more engaged now than, frankly, I've ever seen them be in ensuring that the interests of cities are getting to the ears of members of Congress, activating bipartisan concerns from city leaders, mayors, and council members around the budget and its impact on cities and our ability to, just represent our constituents and serve them the best that we can. Are there things, I know that my colleagues are doing many individual things to engage with residents and ensure that they understand what's happening, but are there things that you wish that we would do more of or differently, or to respond in part to a new environment? I feel like we have a very good partnership with you, with your office. We love working with your district director, Jamie Long. We congratulate you on your new chief of staff, Donna Cassett. We work well with our other representatives as well, and I think we want to understand how we can be a best partner possible to make sure we're advocating for our interests in the state of Minnesota and, so forth.
First of all, I think that the partnership is working, and I think that the city is responding very well. But where can we improve? One, I think if you all can help continue to send me stories about successes, just talking about how teen pregnancy is a problem that the city has taken on together in partnership with the county, and together we've made meaningful difference in the lives of people. You go to somebody who can delay a pregnancy from the age of 16 to 22, you could probably tack on literally thousands of dollars in earning capacity of that person, together with a high school diploma and a whole bunch of other stuff. That is a big deal. Like the county has a program called Hennepin Health, where they use Medicaid dollars to help house people who are chronic users of ER services. That has saved a lot of money, but it also did something really interesting. You have, because of the medical surveillance that some of these chronically homeless and frequent users of the ER, I've sat with them and they've said things to me like, my family's talking to me now. I'm taking my antipsychotic medication regularly, so I don't live under a bridge. I got a place to live, and I'm rekindling relationships with loved ones, whereas before they just didn't know how to deal with my schizophrenia. I mean, people looked me in the eye and told me that. Now that's something that'll wake you up, if you really think about what that person's telling you. But those stories about how government has really helped people makes a huge difference. If you all can say, look, here's what we do with Community Development Block Grant. Here's what we do with various other programs. It makes a big difference. And I will go to the House floor and talk about it on C-SPAN and everywhere else. I think that we've all, including me, have got to become better messengers about what we do. We can no longer take for granted that people understand the importance of responsive government, because sometimes you can benefit from something so long, you just assume it's always going to be there. And I'm telling people, do not assume it's always going to be there. There are people who would love to take it. And so that's one message. The other thing is that everything you're doing to make sure that people have greater access to the ballot, please continue to do that. I know that you all have done some great things on that front. I personally want to thank you for it, but there might be more things to be done. There might be earlier, times to open up new stations where people can go and vote earlier. We cannot afford, Minnesota is the highest turnout in the country, 75%. Still got 25% to go. So can we hit 80? Let's see what we can do. And I think all of us have to figure out what to do. We got a great Secretary of State. We also got a great Minneapolis. And put those things together, put our heads together, we can go higher. So with those two things, I just want to say thank you to you, Madam Chair. Thank you to all the council members, and let's stay in touch and have a great day.
All right. Thank you so very much.
Absolutely.
We really appreciate your attendance. All right. Well, I think we don't have any action since there was no written report. And so we'll move on to our next discussion item, which is an update to our city policy positions. Ms. Lush.
Thank you, Madam Chair and council members. It's pretty cool to get to follow Congressman Ellison, but I don't know that this will be as enthralling. But we are here to talk about adding a new potential item to the city's 2017, then leading into 2018 policy positions for our state legislative agenda and policy positions. We have a short presentation here today. It's going to be offered by Robin Hutchinson, our Director of Public Works. In brief, what we are proposing is to approve an additional amendment to the City of Minneapolis's 2017 state legislative policy positions to include a statement in our transportation and transit system policies section that would state support for and then improve roadway safety, reduce crashes, and support neighborhood livability by enabling local municipalities to set underlying speed limits and supporting additional design features on local roadways. And Madam Chair, the genesis of this is that, and you see a bit of background on the RCA, is that by default, Minnesota speed limits are set by state statute. And there are very few limited circumstances where for the city of Minneapolis, for example, in our statutory designation, there are very limited situations where that speed limit can be modified, and 30 miles an hour is the statutory speed limit for an urban district, which would include the city of Minneapolis. So we are suggesting some legislative changes that would allow municipalities more flexibility to set their own speed limits at the local level. So with that, I would turn it over to Ms. Hutchinson to give a little bit of background about why this is a suggested policy.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, thank you so much for allowing me a few minutes to support Melissa Lesch's introduction and talk very briefly about why we support this recommendation and really look forward to working in partnership with our IGR team to move this forward. We have close to 1,000 miles of local streets in the city of Minneapolis. This is a huge impact if we do have the control, if we do have the ability to set the speed limits. These are roads that serve residential areas, our local economy, green spaces, health services. Above all, they serve people and people's needs. We've lost that a little bit in our industry in setting speed limits at 85th percentile. That is largely why it's 30 miles an hour de facto. And what we would really like to do in having control over speed limits is make it safer. We have been working on a number of things to make it safer for all people traveling on our roadways, and speed is one of the most determinant factors. The relationship between speed and injury is very strong. And I'm going to talk you through some of the evidence of that, some of the research of that, and give you a couple of visuals to highlight my points. We would like the ability to set our own speed limits so that we can lower them. If we can lower them, we will be able to reduce fatalities and injuries for people on our streets. So the relationship is very strong. At lower speeds, it's really about peripheral distance and your ability to see what is on the sides of the streets. At 10 to 15 miles an hour, stopping distance and crash risk is low because your peripheral vision remains very high. Move to 20 to 25 miles an hour, your peripheral vision starts to close in. And if you watch the edges of the image, you can see it diminishes. Now we're at 30 to 35 miles an hour, and note that many of our streets are set at 30 miles an hour. And now 40 plus. Drivers are severely visually impaired at 40 miles an hour in peripheral vision. This is the primary determinant of crashes that lead to injury and fatality. The difference in the risk of fatality between 30 miles an hour and 20 miles an hour is significant. Our ability to control local speed limits in an effort to reduce the speed limits so that we can eliminate death and injury is very important to us as a city because it supports our overall quality of life and so many of the goals that we have, primarily people feeling safe and secure to move around their city. So I'm very supportive and very grateful to the IGR team who have drafted the recommendation to you. I can stand for any questions or turn it back to Melissa on any of the technical items if you'd like to ask, and Melissa's also here. Thanks.
Council President Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I fully support this effort. I have to say that as I, meet with my constituents, the most frequent complaint that I get, honestly and truly, is people speeding, on residential streets, and it just drives people crazy. Having said that, this will have very little effect if we don't work with the police department to actually give tickets to people. And we have the police department has disbanded their traffic unit. And I'd be interested to see, before we go over to the legislature, exactly how many times people have been arrested for speeding offenses versus perhaps 5 years ago. Because I have the feeling that our numbers are way, way down. And I don't think we'd have much effect if we don't have a coordinated story with our police department.
All right, I'm not seeing other, Council Member Andrew Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just wanted to echo that sentiment too around enforcement. It's a huge issue in my ward as well, where we have lots of speeding, lots of failure to stop at stop signs. That's a huge issue. And we've even had, on one day, we're having selective enforcement out at one of our problem stop sign areas. In the afternoon, selective enforcement was going out there. In the morning, a pregnant woman was hit by a car that decided not to stop at the stop sign. Fortunately, she's okay and her baby's okay as well, but this is just a constant issue. And I think one of the problems is, and I brought this up to residents, is I cannot remember the last time I have personally seen somebody pulled over within city limits for speeding. And so part of it is a lack of enforcement. I think makes people not appreciate the speed limit as much as they might otherwise if they did see some visibility of enforcement. And I look over to St. Paul and I see what they're doing, and they actually have media campaigns over there. And I understand you're not the police department, so I'm just speaking out loud here, and I appreciate that. But over in St. Paul, I know, for instance, they do a big campaign around crosswalk safety. So that's something I would like to see here and have communicated as well to our MPD leadership, and hopefully we can have some of that happening.
Madam Chair, if I might respond very briefly. I've convened a multidisciplinary team to address safety on our streets, and it includes a member of the police department. We meet monthly, and we have been talking about our need to coordinate. We've also been talking about our need for media and campaigning. We've also been talking about design strategies as well as the health benefits. So I would be happy to bring this back to that multidisciplinary team so that we can talk about it with our PD.
Thank you.
Council President Johnson, and then I want to put myself in queue just because I have been part of kind of the very initial discussions on this, and I wanted to share some things about that as well as our communication with St. Paul.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I guess, one of the things we have, these speed wagons that we put out at times, and some of them, if memory serves me right, can actually give you a report as to how many time or what the average speed is. And I know we've done that testing on our roads, obviously too, where we look at the posted speeds and how often people violate them and that kind of thing. I'd be interested, and again, as part of the overall look at this, what do we find on our roads? Are people violating the existing speed limits at X% of the time or whatever? I'd just kind of be interested in that information. Thank you.
Councilmember Warsame.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to ask, I get a lot of complaints, especially around Franklin Avenue, which is large, and it's a county road as well. So is there coordinations with the county in terms of this reducing the speed and also, I would like to commend both my colleagues, President Johnson and Councilmember Johnson, with regards to more, enforcement. I don't see that happening as well as education as well. The importance of making sure that we reduce speed, but around the large thoroughfares, Hennepin and Franklin Avenue, is there coordination going on?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, Councilmember Warsami, we are coordinating with the county on our larger efforts. We have a goal of encouraging them to take some similar measures as we do so that we consistently can treat the problem of speed throughout our community.
Yeah. So I'm glad to hear that my colleagues are all very interested in this topic. This hasn't yet come to the Transportation Public Works Committee, even though there have been members of that committee, including myself and Councilmember Reich, who chairs it, and other council members as well, who have been part of kind of an initial meeting that included many internal city stakeholders to kind of say, how can we move forward on some efforts that would better protect pedestrians. I think that's kind of maybe the better way to say it. The city of St. Paul, Ms. Hutchinson and I met with Council President Stark and Kathy Lantry, the Public Works Director there, some months ago, just to talk in a very high-level way about our similar interests, including whether we could get some local approval or approval from the state that would allow us to better consider these residential speed limits. And we think it is something that there is interest from communities around the state, and we need this change in our policies that really allow us to kind of be part of those discussions and advocate this as a position and kind of see, is this the year to move this forward at the legislature, or kind of how that strategy continues to move forward. So this is really just the start of that. I will say, just even kind of hearing the variety of comments from council members, I mean, it just speaks to, this is a really big effort. It is a big culture shift on how do we put together all these moving pieces that in the end are supported by good data and or good, pilots to try, or whatever that is, to have a more concerted strategy for supporting pedestrians. And we've had many very highly concerning injuries, even death. And so we're trying to, I think, balance a lot of different things that are happening, from the speeding you see on residential streets, which I'll say that's kind of one of my top things too. I think, as I understand, it's a top one kind of across cities, honestly, to other things, other kinds of really great concerns. And I feel like we probably also are going to need kind of a more involved framework for how to move the plan forward, including how do we engage stakeholders, which we have not done any of that work yet. And so I'm excited that Ms. Hutchinson is really interested in leading this work. She kind of came forward right at the beginning of her tenure here saying she was interested in this work, and found partners immediately from many folks around the city, including from the police department, from city attorney, and other places. So I feel like we're kind of in that moving it forward, and it's great to hear that there's also policymaker interest in how to support the work, because I think that's what it's going to take, is a combination. All right. So with that, I think we just need to approve this language change, and so I will move approval of that. On approval, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? That item is approved, and I believe with that we've concluded with our agenda for today, so we are adjourned. Thank you.